Wham! Talk 1600. You're catching the drift. Conservative talk. Intelligent conversations on local, state, and national issues with Gary Wellings, chief editor of the Current newspaper and Current Online. Join in the conversation at 734-822-1600. And now, your host, Gary Wellings.
Good Saturday afternoon, and welcome to the Drift Radio Show. We're on the air live, coming to you from Wham Studios, deep in the bowels of the People's Republic of Ann Arbor. You know, your host normally would be Gary Wellings, but he's not available right now. He's off on assignment. Derek, did the check clear?
Yeah.
Okay. Gary's going to be back next week, though. We have great news. Gary's going to be back next week, and so you can look forward to that. In the meantime, in studio with me is Alex Wassell and Pastor Rick Jadidering, who's promised to be quiet a lot.
I'm nervous being here now that I find out you kidnap radio show hosts.
You can't prove that. You cannot. We just asked
just
that
a
the
rumor.
check cleared. It's just he's safe in that room, right, Derek? Okay.
Yeah, yes, he is.
That's good. Hey, just in case, did I forget to announce my name again? Ed Bonderenka. What is that my name?
I think that is.
Hi there. Welcome.
It was last week.
So, once again, welcome to Pastor Rick and to Alex. Friend them on Facebook. And we're live. If it's Saturday afternoon, July 5th, just after 1 o'clock, we're live. And today, before we bring on our special guest, I want to talk to you. Oh, excuse me. This is the Drift Radio Show.
It's the news you need to know.
Thank you, sir. Boy, wow, heresy. So I want to talk to you about La Casa's Garden Tour Weekend, the 21st annual. It's July 13th and 14th. That's next Saturday and Sunday, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. daily. They got all kinds of stuff going on, including the Twilight in the Garden Party Gala, which is Saturday, July 20th. Okay, so that's the week after that. And so you can see this almost full-page ad La Casa has pulled out in the Current newspaper, which brings you this show, or go to currentonline.com and find out more information on this. It's on page 8 in case you want to just ignore everything else in there, which would be stupid. So go to page 8 of currentonline.com to find out more about La Casa and lacasacenter.org. That's LACASA center.org. Or you can call them at 517-548-1350. Thank you. Now, I noticed that we don't have a light on the board, and that means that our special guest caller has not called in yet. And I'll bet you because I neglected to give him the phone number. So, in the meantime,
I want to talk about the Drift real quick.
Go ahead real quick while I get a hold of my friend.
Three of my favorite people writing articles in there. You got Stephanie from Wham. You've got Derek Stone, and you've got an excellent article in there by Patrick Kolbeck. So I suggest, hey, folks, get a copy of The Current. Read those articles. I actually read the one by Stephanie. It's absolutely wonderful. Have you had a chance to go, Alex, to go over it?
Well, I look at it occasionally. The trouble is, I don't live out there. I can't get a hard copy. I'm thinking about moving out to Whitmore Lake just so I could get The Current delivered.
That would be a smart
or just
move.
pick it up.
I know the editor. We might be able to get you one occasionally.
I have people I mail this paper to out of state or upstate because they miss it so much. They actually pay a little charge for my wife, Sherry, to put in a paper tube and mail it off. So, like I said, we have our special guest who's going to be calling in very shortly. His name is William Federer. He's an author, radio commentator, bon vivant on Rock on Tour, and a friend, somewhat of a friend of mine. He's spent the night in my house before. We've had dinner and breakfast together at the Bomber Restaurant, which he was really impressed with. I don't know if he'd lend me $20 in a pinch, but he's also the host of the American Minute, and Bill has written 20 books, including George Washington Carver, His Life and Faith in His Own Words, America's God and Country, an Encyclopedia of Quotations. That's his best-selling work. The Faith of FDR, which is a very short book. I kid you. I'm sorry. And we talked to Bill, maybe a year and a half ago, about what every American needs to know about the Koran, a history of Islam and the United States. That was a pretty interesting show. For anybody who says, Thomas Jefferson had a Koran because he was pro-Islam.
No,
Well,
he actually got the Quran so he could understand what he was facing.
exactly, what he was fighting in the Barbary Pirates, right? So then Federer signed a 2009 ecumenical statement known as the Manhattan Declaration. That was a pretty important declaration. It's a call of Christian conscience. And he served on the board and staff of several nonprofit organizations, ministries, and schools. And I'm stalling because I'm waiting for Bill to call in.
You know, it was really interesting about the, since we got some time, and it's one of the subjects I like to talk about is history. The idea of Thomas Edison owning the Quran. Yes, it was actually just to understand what was going on, who he was facing when he was fighting those in Tripoli, the Muslims that were literally hijacking ships, holding their crews hostage until their country of origin would pay the money. Kind of like you and Gary, you know.
No, you can't prove that.
But the whole thing, it all boils down to this, and I'm glad you actually just mentioned that because I can run off anything. But the Treaty of Tripoli, which everyone uses to say, look, the United States was never a Christian country, has to understand the line in there where it says we are not a Christian country. Is because of Thomas Edison reading the Quran, understanding that the Muslims can't sign a treaty with a country that is declared as a Christian country. Now, when we think of a Christian country in the United States, we think of it as, hey, you can go to church, you can do you can do everything else. What they can't do business with, what the Muslims couldn't do business with, was a country that was a theocracy as a Christian country. And the United States was never a theocracy. No. And that's what that statement in the Tripoli Treaty was actually making the statement of, is we're not this type of country that you can't make a treaty with. And so it's unfortunately, it was something that was very much abused.
Okay. And I'd like to give a welcome to our guest, William Federer. Hey, Bill, you there?
Ed, great to be with you.
Good to talk to you again. So I'm sorry for the inconvenience there, a miscommunication on my part, I'm sure. And so we have some questions we'd like to ask you. But the first off is, what's your latest book?
Who is the King in America? And it goes through 6,000 years of world history, shows that the most common form of government is a king. Now, they go by different names: Pharaoh, Caesar, Kaiser, Sultan, Tsar, communist dictator, Chairman Mao. But power wants to concentrate into the hands of one person. And it's like a magnetic pull, like gravity, like a black hole. And so it's in human nature. So you put some babies in a playpen, one takes the rattle from the others. You put some kids on a playground, one's the bully. You put some people in the woods, one of them is an Indian chief. You put them in the inner city, one of them is a gang leader. And all a king is, in a sense, is a glorified gang leader. And so it's in the fallen human nature, and as the centuries go on, the kingdoms get bigger, because with military advancements, you can kill more people, right? Iron's stronger than bronze, but it's that same fallen nature of Cain, kill, and Abel. Anyway, the King of England had the biggest empire in world history, at least up until the time of the founding, and America's founders decided to break away and flip it and make the people the king. So it's a polarity change in the flow of power. Instead of top-down, it's bottom-up.
Okay.
And so the word citizen means co-king, so we're all citizens. We're all co-kings of America. And anyway, that's the general concept behind it.
Great. So we're subjects, not citizens. Oh, we're citizens, not subjects.
Not subjects, yeah.
Well, and let's change the subject now. But staying along that line, something I wanted to ask you was, because you're a historian, what has historically been the relationship of the president or the executive branch and the Supreme Court? And I'm thinking in context of and I think there was a ruling called Marbury that might have influenced this, but does the president have a leg to stand on if he were to say, you know what, I think Scottus is wrong on this citizenship question, and I'm just going to go ahead and print the census the way I think it should be printed?
Right. So the Supreme Court was always the weakest branch of the government, and that the laws were written by Congress. The president would enact the laws, but it was sort of undefined And so originally Congress met in the basement of the White House. And anyway, you had leaders that, what am I trying to say? Really, John Marshall was the one who came up with the idea of concentrating power more and more into the hands of the courts. But prior to then, it was a little bit undefined. And so you had John Adams leaving office, appointed someone, and when Jefferson became the third president, he's like, I'm not going to honor the previous president's appointment. That's not my guy. Well, the guy sues, and the Supreme Court, basically steps in and begins to tell, their opinion on what the president should or shouldn't do. But Andrew Jackson was a major person in this, where the Indian Removal Act wanted to chase all the Indians out of Georgia. And the Supreme Court, to their credit, they decide in favor of the Indians. But Andrew Jackson said, what's his name? Marshall made his decision. Let him enforce it. In other words, the Supreme Court doesn't have any what do you call it?
Enforcement powers.
Armies, as Napoleon would put it, armies.
Sure, and so the Supreme Court didn't have the power to enforce it, so they basically Andrew Jackson thumbed his nose at the Supreme Court and said, "You made your decision, but I'm not going to follow it." So that's the general concept that they had back then.
Okay,
so,
folks, I want to give you a little background here. I've been with Bill before and actually seen him do interviews from the inside of my Ford Ranger from a conference room in the plant I was working with. And he's a busy guy. In fact, after he's done with this, he's catching a flight. He'll be leaving us shortly after. So, that's the way it goes in radio.
I apologize. I'm returning a rent-a-car right now, so I apologize.
Did you have something you wanted to ask, Rick?
No. I actually, the way I see this whole president thing that you're talking about, and if he wants to comment on it, great, is the Supreme Court said the way it was going and the way that the Census Bureau was putting this together, they couldn't do it. The Supreme Court can overturn a president's decree if he does one.
Executive
order. But it would have to. He could do an executive order. It would have to go back to the Supreme Court.
Yeah. Yep. I think in this case you ought to just print it. And by that time it's done. It's on its way. It's better to ask for forgiveness than to ask for permission. But I think we've about exercised that topic as far as I wanted. You wanted to actually bring up being that it's the Founders' Weekend, so to speak, the 4th of July, Independence Day weekend. We wanted to talk about some women who were involved in the founding. And I want to know, you had some people in mind. I had some people in mind. I was wondering if you had anything to say, especially with the Colin Kaepernick debacle, so to speak, what you thought of what was going on with Betsy Ross.
So Betsy Ross was a Quaker, and the Quakers were the most anti-slavery group in America. And William Penn, he came up with the nonviolent response, with the Quakers. They didn't even have a militia until Ben Franklin came along, and they were into not using corporal punishment, like putting somebody in the stocks and whipping them. So they came up with the idea of putting someone in a room and leaving them in there till they became penitent.
A timeout.
Till they repented. And so they call it the penitentiary for repentance.
Whoa.
Anyway, so these Quakers were anti-slavery. In the early 1700s, Anthony Benezet, Benezet, he's a Quaker, and he begins to bring black children and educate them. He goes to the Quaker meeting, their big annual meeting, and he proposes that the denomination officially go on record as being against slavery. It passes. And every single meeting after that, they're against slavery. And every single government meeting, they bring up getting rid of slavery. So much that it was called the Quaker Memorial. The Quaker Memorial. In other words, these politicians would say, at this political meeting we talked about this, that, the other, and then there's the Quaker Memorial.